Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to this Fintelekt and Asian Bankers Association webinar on AML and digital payments, trends, tools, and technologies. I'm Arpita Bedekar from Fintelekt, and it's my pleasure to be your host and moderator today. We have a record turnout. We have close to 1,700 participants registered for this webinar from over 40 countries. And to do justice to this collective time that you will all be spending with us, we are joined by a panel of very experienced compliance professionals representing payments companies and advisory companies from across Asia. So let me welcome Jyothi Mekala, Head Compliance BillDesk from India, Guada Vergel de Dios, Head of Compliance and Government Relations Xendit, joining us from Philippines, Julia Chin, Head of Compliance Hugosave Singapore, and Vijay Bharadwaj, Manager Ingenia Consultants, also joining us from Singapore. Thank you so much to each of you for being here today. Before we get going, I have a quick announcement to make. We will be giving out free participation certificates to those who attend this webinar live, that is to all the participants here today. And detailed instructions on downloading this certificate from Fintelekt Academy will be sent to you via Zoom on Monday morning at around the same time. So watch out for that email, and you will have time until the end of the week to download your certificate. So time to get started. We will restrict this discussion to about 50 minutes and then have some questions answered in the last 10 minutes. So participants, you can keep adding your questions to the Q&A box that you see below your screen. And to begin with, I'm going to request all of our panelists today to introduce themselves quickly and tell us briefly what their companies do. And I'm not doing this to make my job as a moderator easier, but I'm trying to give our audience today a flavor of the payment services landscape in Asia and what are really companies doing. And as a follow-on question, if each of you can tell us what you've seen new in, let's say, the last 1 year. New trends, new developments, new regulations, whatever that might be, that would really help. So can I ask Guada, would you like to kick it off?
Hi, I'm Guada Vergel de Dios. I'm from the Philippines. I've been immersed, I guess, in the compliance world for the past 16 years, and that's aging me. So as mentioned by Arpita, I work as the head of compliance and government relations for the Philippines in Xendit. Xendit is a regional payment system. So we are a company that actually enables all sorts of entities to make payments easier. So in terms of what I'm seeing in the Philippines, there are a number of things, changes that's actually happening. So you have the spirit of digitization, which is an offshoot of the pandemic. And also, I guess, interoperability is also one new trend, at least in the payments ecosystem in the Philippines. So yeah, that's it, Arpita. Thank you.
Thank you. Julia, may I request you to go next?
Hi, thank you very much for having me here. I'm Julia from Hugosave. We are based in Singapore, licensed as a major payment service provider. Our app is actually a wealth care app where we help our users to save, to spend smartly, save, budget, and also to invest, starting with gold. Back to you, Arpita.
Okay, thank you. Jyothi, would you like to go next? Please also tell us what you've seen new. Julia, I'm going to come back there.
Sure. Definitely, Arpita. Hi, everyone. Good morning. So I am Jyothi. I'm the Chief Compliance Officer and MLRO for BillDesk. BillDesk is a company which has been recently acquired by Payu. So, in brief, is overall, I have around 18 years of experience in the regulatory compliance, fraud, risk, and AML transaction monitoring. And Now, coming to what's new in the last 1 year in India, that's a very interesting topic. Yes, we have the recent, the most interesting topic is the lending apps. Is something which India has seen something new in the last 1 year. So, as a fintech, we are trying to facilitate, we are trying to take lending to every corner of the to ensure people use the lending services. But at the same time, we are seeing a mushroom growth of lending apps all over. This is not just India. I think this globally we have seen a lot of lending apps across, and yep, that's where the compliance also comes into the picture. RBI has come with the lending guidelines. Couple of 4 weeks back, RBI has updated the lending guidelines to all the payment service operators as well as the lending service operators at the NBFCs. There are certain guidelines which have been passed by RBI. So this is one of the challenge we are facing. How do we trace the compliance? How do I go ahead with the regulatory compliance part of it? How do I trace the transaction monitoring, name screening? So all these come into picture. And along with lending, we also have gaming apps, which everyone would have seen. There's a huge mushroom growth of gaming apps. So all of us support a lot of gaming apps. But yeah, again, there are certain challenges. How do I identify? How do I onboard? Who is my UBO? Am I doing my UBO checks? That's what the guideline says. So this is also one of the challenge. And the next, not definitely interesting, but not all that heated up is in India currently is a little bit on the crypto side. But yeah, it's not as hot as lending and gaming as of now. This is what we are seeing, Arpita, in brief. These
Thank
are the
you. Thank you.
major things in India for the last 1 year. Yeah.
Thank you. And last but not least, let me turn to Vijay. Thanks for patiently waiting for all the
No
ladies to
problem,
have their
Arpita. I mean,
say.
I think it's as they say, always ladies first. So, I think it's good that you give them a chance. So, I think just a quick introduction. My name is Vijay. I work with Ingenia Consultants. We are basically a compliance and risk consulting firm based out of Singapore. We help our sort of clients to get their licenses, remain compliant, and also help them with the internal audits. So, those are the three main buckets that we do. So, which means that we also look at outsourcing compliance-related activities in certain areas, not just in the payment side, but also on other parts of the financial services. So that's in a nutshell what we do. So in case anybody has sort of come across sort of these kind of requirements, I think that's where we land ourselves in. I mean, coming to that question of seeing what you've seen in the last 12 months, I mean, 12 months in payments almost seems like a lifetime because there's so much happening in this space. I mean, I think it is very difficult to summarize, but I mean, if you are to look at what really have we seen? I mean, I think the adoption rate of new technologies, that's one thing which primarily is of importance. And you say that there's so much new technologies coming in. I think that's the key challenge for some of the compliance sort of folks who are on the call or on the panel or all of us on a day-to-day basis. The focus has been on ease of doing business, which means how do you onboard the customer quickly, the whole customer experience, how do you manage that? The speed and the volume of transactions have increased significantly. So how do you basically, to the point that Jyothi made, how do you look at it from a transaction monitoring point of view? How do you make sure that your transaction monitoring is well tuned and then you're able to look at the right things? New payment methods, wallet to wallet, card to card, you name it and it's out there. So, I mean, how do you understand the risk associated with that? I mean, increasingly, as we've seen, I think there was a report from PwC recently said that the economy is by and large moving towards being cashless. I mean, I don't remember the last time when I went to an ATM and withdrew cash because there is no need for that at the moment. And cross-border brings in a completely different game with it. So the moment you touch cross-border, it is going to bring in different dimension. How do you manage the risk? And last but not the least, which all of us possibly use it on a daily basis, is the increased use of e-commerce. So all these sort of things, I mean, these are some of them were there in the past, but I think they're changing the way it's being delivered. So talking about from an AML perspective, if you have to look at it, saying how digitized are you? Are you still running manual processes? How do you look at different aspects of basically using RegTech as a tool? Again, when you're talking about the point that Guada talked about, interoperability, it comes into the point of data privacy. How do you share information between different operators? How that is being done. So these are sort of trends that are being seen in the industry, I think, generally across Asia, because I believe Asia is leading the pack when it comes to global digitization. And that's where we are seeing all these trends emerging.
Yeah, I will echo Vijay's sentiment on that as well. Sorry, Arpita, I cut you off there. But I think one of the things that to me is the most exciting is seeing in ASEAN region the cross-border linkages for the national real-time payment, the QR code, like for example, Pay Now to UPI, Pay Now to Do It Now. So there are a lot of all these that are happening, and there's an initiative also to connect 5 ASEAN countries. Right, so this is going to be very exciting. The other thing, observation I had is that more and more crypto payment platforms are coming up. Say, for example, if you may have a Shiba Inu wallet and the other party has an ETH wallet. So we are seeing this kind of in between cryptocurrency, the platform to be able to make payment using different wallets are happening as well. So it's talking about. So this the payment space is really, really exciting, and a lot of new innovation happening.
Absolutely. I caught a lot of catchwords: digitization, interoperability, digital lending, gaming, crypto, new technologies. So it's absolutely a very dynamic space. But there's also that inevitable flip side of this boom, and that is of an increase in financial crime and money laundering. So let me come to the question of AML risks, and what are the really AML risks that are a result of this very fast growth, and it's a completely new and evolving sector that's coming in. So again, I'm going to request Julia to go again on this. What according to you are the AML CFT risks that are currently evolving in the payment space?
I think as far as the AML risks are concerned, they remain relatively similar to what it used to be in the traditional space, except that now things are just moving faster. You will still have money mules, and in fact, because of COVID, there are a lot of people who have lost their jobs. I see a lot of job scams, human trafficking happening. So these are the areas that to me, we need to do more as a community to support the people and to protect the people from falling for scams and to be defrauded. So, and also I see the convergence of fraud with AML as well, because, we are getting smarter in the way that we do our due diligence and KYC. So the fraudsters are also getting smarter in still, getting into our system through fraud. So that's a convergence there. Back to you, Arpita.
Thank you. Thank you. Jyothi, what about you? What are your views on the new AML risks, if any? Julia mentioned that basically everything is going faster, but are there any new areas that you see?
Definitely, they are definitely. At least from when I look at the payment system operators, especially from the Indian side, where I will see is we are just at still at the infant stage of the capturing the AML risk. When it comes to fraud and risk, we are quite advanced. But when it comes to the AML side of it, we are still at an infancy stage where there's a huge risk of how do I identify. Why banks have been quite advanced. Banks have a 100-year-old history of capturing the AML risk. But as a payment system operator, we don't even get much of the information. I don't get the bank account number. I don't get the IFSC code. And the transaction is coming from an regulated entity. The customer's account is already KYC account from where the transaction is coming. So this where I see a lot of risk. We are still in the stage of finalizing the rules and still reviewing the existing rules. We are doing an R&D around it, and things like when I look at the gaming part of it, from where is the money coming? From where is the money going out? Do I have enough technology? Do I have enough risk and fraud rules to capture these transactions and identify this could be an AML? And if it's an AML, how do I proceed further? So these are the major risks which I see in the day-to-day events. Arpita. Yeah.
Thank you. Vijay, anything that you would like to add to this?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of emphasis from the regulators. If you look at nowadays, I think we are moving to a stage where non-face-to-face has become the norm sort of thing when it comes to onboarding customers. So regulators have been publishing, because there's an increased view that frauds are going up significantly. which means that you don't know who's actually opening the account because your underlying premise of AML is saying that Arpita is opening the account or Vijay is opening the account, but in reality, if somebody else is opening the account in the background, your premise of doing the entire AML goes for a sort of a spin. And that is where fraud detections, how do you really understand who's actually on board, you're onboarding, and do you have the right technology to combat the speed at which the business is growing? So that's become one sort of an important point. I mean, the other thing is account takeover, which is something that we've seen heavily during the pandemic, saying that account is opened in somebody else's name, somebody else is operating that account. It could be an elderly, it could be a minor. How do you make sure that those controls are put in place to identify? The other important aspect which I see is detection of rogue activities, because it's not like a bank where the expectation is that I do a transaction, the money will come to me 3 days later. So there's enough time to come back, look at everything, make sure things are okay and go. The expectation when you're working with a lot of payment companies, which are mostly fintechs, is that it's real time. So, and customers are transacting round the clock. So how do you really combat that and make sure that the outliers are being parked and not let it go through? But you would expect majority of the transactions to go through on a HTTP method. So you don't expect customers to be held back. So these are challenges that I see coming through the sort of new technologies, new payment methods, new sort of delivery mechanisms that we have. And I've experienced it myself. So I mean, I can give you some examples as we go down the road, saying that why you move to new technologies and new delivery methods compared to this, but there are definitely risks that you see. And I think regulators have been proactive in the region to look at some of these things. Definitely Singapore stands out in terms of as being a leader in terms of the regulations that they come out with. And NFTF is a sort of a document that they publish saying how do you deal with some of these issues.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. And the clear takeaway for me is the speed at which things are moving. So from risks, let's turn to the issue of, how do you now build effective AML controls, to this landscape? So to me, there seem to be two aspects. On the one hand, there is limited knowledge that can directly be borrowed from banks and financial institutions when it comes to, let's say, typologies or red flag indicators as well. But on the other hand, new payments companies can also start with a clean slate, right? They can avoid the mistakes that the banks have made so far, and they can plan ahead for this complexity and for the speed at which things are moving. So now how can these new entities ensure robust AML controls? Clearly, one size fits all approach may also not be possible because of the various business models that are there in the market. But are there any thumb rules? So can I start with Guada? What do you think? And then I would also like Jyothi to come into the conversation.
I think the first rule of thumb is that we need to adopt and execute on the requirements mandated by regulations. In such a case, as said by one of the greatest philosophers, Obi-Wan Kenobi, do or do not, there is no try for this kind of requirements. So for example, sanction screening is something that payments companies must have. So for those matters that are not mandated and up to the payments companies, their AML CFT program, like any other financial institution, should be, as you mentioned, risk-based, or more precisely, fit for purpose or vulnerabilities. I mean, if you think about it, it does not make sense for a payment company to procure a rather expensive transaction monitoring that addresses credit card payments for fraud, for example, where it does not offer credit card channels, for example. So, and payment companies should have a regular AML CFT risk assessment so that it can be guided with which products and customer segments are riskier and therefore need to be subjected to stricter controls. They should also try to identify patterns from historical transactions, identifying patterns or similarities in the transaction, which they find suspicious or unusual. And I guess similar to other financial institutions, it really starts with a good institutional risk assessment. For a compliance officer or compliance unit to come up with a blueprint of designing its own AML CFT program, it really needs to have a comprehensive understanding of its money laundering or terrorist financing threats vulnerabilities. So I guess if you have that kind of mindset, you are okay to start your house of compliance for your payments company.
Thank you. Jyothi, for views?
Yeah. I completely agree with Gauta. So it should be an ongoing research about how we work, if we have to continuously do a review of it, what's happening, what's the industry doing. In addition, what I would say, what my understanding is, there should be a way of sharing the patterns among the entities, among the payment service providers, the banks. Banks has a huge amount of data which doesn't come to us, but if there's some kind of a blacklisted deposit somewhere, so that is something which we should also look at it, if not at least some kind of an interaction with payment service providers and banks, where together we can come together and interact, share the data, which would help us, because we don't have the visibility of that kind of data what the banks have. So that would be something, a good initiative, if we should start looking at sharing the best practices with each other and involve the banks as well. Yeah.
Thank you. So basically, you're suggesting that there has to be a collaborative approach as things move forward.
Exactly. It has to be a collaborative approach, Arpita, because as a PSO, we don't have much of the data available. So this is where I look at look at bank to help me out with the data. I know it comes under PII. Again, under PII, all the data cannot be shared. Something like there's an AML activity happening. Someone knocks at my door. Let's say the cops knock at the door and say, give me the transaction details. I can give them the transaction ID, the date. As a PSO, I can give these. But beyond that, I won't even have the data. So it should be more of a collaborative approach where we can come together, share the best practices, and come out with the best solution.
Sure. Vijay, you've worked with payments companies and now you're on the advisory side. So are there any best practices that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, I think I echo some of the points that Guada made, and then to Jyothi's points, I mean, I think fundamentally, but things have not changed. So when you do AML programs, your fundamentals don't change. Do you understand your products? Do you understand the delivery mechanism that your business has? Do you know who your customers are? Where do they come from? Which geographies do they interact? And with all these things, what's your regulatory landscape? What the expectation of the regulator is? If you know these things, I mean, that becomes the sort of the thumb rule for any AML program. So if that is the starting point, if you try to come from a financial institution and say, oh, I know the AML program, I'll bring it as it is and put it here, it won't work, because the sort of dynamics might be quite different. And that is where I believe that for any compliance officer, anybody on the compliance team, it's not working in silo. It is working with the business, understanding what they're trying to achieve. And we've had enough conversation, Julia and me, when we have met, saying that how do we get a seat on the table to understand really what the business is doing, how do you move forward on this, and basis that you can then tailor a sort of risk-based AML program which meets your business requirements. I mean, I think there are enough examples out there. I think with people who are on the call as well, industry practitioners, we have seen that some of the programs are being ported and it doesn't work in that manner. So that's something that we need to do. And I think that's what would be a sort of a basic starting point if you're going in as a compliance professional or as an MLRO or basically a sort of a compliance head, saying that if you look at and understand what the business is trying to achieve, you will get to know what you need to do. And regulatory landscape is extremely important because you need to work within the remit of that.
Right. So I'm going to come to the regulatory landscape now. And I think the role of a regulator in an emerging industry is always very tricky, I'm going to ask my colleague to bring up a poll and let's get the audience in at this time. And my question to the audience is, do you think the regulator in your jurisdiction has provided adequate clarity to payments companies in terms of applying KYC AML measures? And not just payment companies, we can have anybody from any financial institution really answering that. And, I would really like if the panelists can really comment on what they see over there. Let's give a few seconds more. We have a very large turnout, so it's going to take time to get this.
Even we should vote, Arpita?
You can if you want, Jyothi.
It's a very interesting
Although
question.
I'm going to give you a chance to share your views on this.
It says host and panelists cannot vote.
Oh, is it? Okay. Sorry, that's a settings issue.
No issues, that's okay. But
okay,
yes,
so
it's a very interesting question.
So this is what we have got. And now my question is, what do panelists feel about this? Do they agree with what the audience has to say? And I'm also going to ask them, have there been any shifts? I mean, of course there have been, but what are the shifts in the way that regulators are approaching payment systems? So can we get Julia to comment on this first?
Actually, what I see here is not surprising at all, especially in the recent years. You see FATF has been very active. So because FATF has given a lot of guidance to the countries on how they should they should implement the AML regime. And also the other thing is that if the countries who are not cooperating in implementing the regime, they get put into the gray list. So that's not very good for business from an economic standpoint. So I'm seeing and really encouraged to see that in terms of the regulations, they are getting better in terms of clarity. Yeah, and I think somewhat there would definitely be some of the countries around the world that are still a little bit behind in this process if they have not been as piped into the FATF as some of the other countries are. So that, well, in any case, I think that this is really encouraging.
Indeed, yes. Guada, what is your opinion? What is the situation in Philippines?
I think this is a good picture of the general sentiments as far as the regulators in the Philippines is concerned. So it has always been highlighted that the Philippine digital payment industry has regulators that are proactive in creating an enabling environment. They have shown openness to new technology while remaining vigilant on possible risks. And I think that, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, which is the overseer of the National Retail Payment System of the Philippines, is cognizant of the challenges that they are currently facing, which include limited extent and scope of regulatory ambit, and rudimentary granting of license, deficient corporate governance, compliance, and internal control framework. So to combat this, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas is really, and you have to commend them for being hard at work on enhancing regulation on payments and multiple stakeholders collaboration. So we do sense that BSP is committed to provide an enabling environment that fosters digital or payment innovations and facilitate digital payment adoption while ensuring that attendant risks are effectively managed.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. And Vijay, I'm going to come to you with a slightly different question. And my question is, what challenges are companies facing in terms of adhering to the whole regulatory expectation bit? And how can companies ensure, a good relationship with the regulators right from the beginning?
So, I think I'll just touch upon for probably 30 seconds upon the regulatory landscape as well. I think while we are on this webinar talking about AML as the key focus, I think in mature markets, definitely you see that regulators have moved just beyond being just on AML, while AML continues to be the key focus. Because if you looked at how the regulations have matured over a period of time, it was mainly AML focused all the way when it was in Singapore called the Money Services Business Act, or now it's called the Payment Service Act. But if you see the way the regulations have matured, it's talking well beyond AML. So it's a far wide-reaching sort of regulations, to the point that Guada was making, saying that it covers multiple aspects. It talks about sort of reporting obligations. It talks about, so it's a full ecosystem that the regulators have created now. Coming back to your question on saying, what is the challenge that a lot of fintechs, I would say payment companies, you would say saying are facing today is these are sort of a lot of new regulations come in. So it would possibly mean that somebody has to be having that experience to look at it at a more macro level rather than going into the micro and fixing it. So does the industry have that level of skill sets available? So talking about saying, do you have enough talent pool available in the market who can basically, let's say people are moving from sort of traditional financial institutions to new age companies, fintechs. Do they have the capability to look at it at a more holistic basis and able to give that sort of comfort to the regulators, saying that, yeah, we do understand the risk that our business brings to the table and we are looking at it in the right manner. So that's a challenge that is there. So having the right skill set. So you see a lot of people who are very young or have worked in specific functions within a compliance department. So they might be very good at onboarding, but that's alone not good enough. So you need to have a much wider thing. And so talent pool is a concern. I mean, do you have the right people doing the job? That becomes a concern, because if you don't have the right people doing the job, then obviously you're not addressing the issues the way it should be addressed. So that's one thing. And to the second part of your question, which is saying, how do you manage regulatory sort of relations? I mean, there's no secret mantra. I mean, it's been transparent. If you have an issue, be upfront about it. If there are challenges, I mean, I think there are various ways in which you can address it. There are industry forums working towards certain issues. There are challenges that the entire industry is going through. So we come together as a forum and talk about different issues and then represent it to the regulators. There are markets where regulators are very proactive, so they do come back and ask the industry participation. There are consultation papers that we work with the regulators and are able to give our feedback, saying that how it should be shaped going forward.
Good. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. And tied to regulatory expectations, and I know increasingly a lot of regulators are now stressing on the issue of culture and good governance. I know MAS has given some guidelines out for that. So what I want to ask now is, how can these new age companies ensure that they bring on the right culture into the organization, the culture of compliance, and they make AML CFT a priority right from the beginning? How can they do that? How can they ensure that? So again, can I come to Julia, because I know Singapore has been a pioneer on this.
I'm going to say something a little bit contentious. I'm going to start with this statement. The role of a compliance officer is not to please the regulators.
True.
There's more we need to do there, because the regulators can only do so much, right? What we need to do, you have to start with the right mindset, and like you say, Arpita, the right culture. How I actually do it in my company is, well, we do have we have a close-knit team, and I have also a team of engineers in India as well. They are based in Hyderabad. And normally when we onboard any of our team members, one thing for sure that we would remind everyone is that why are we doing compliance? Compliance here is not here to police everybody, to tell you what you're doing right or wrong. What I want you guys to do is that when you're looking in your product development, and whatever work that you do, remember two things. One is there is a life behind every dollar of money being laundered. The next thing to do is that, now that's on the financial crime side, and on the consumer protection, whenever that we produce any product, is this a product that I am going to, or I'm willing to sell to my grandmother? So when you carry that kind of mindset in the work that we do, that's how I feel that, whether or not the regulators or the regulations are going to change, and we know that they will change very fast, having this kind of mindset, the moment we get it right the first time we do things, that would be my take on how we start to build that compliance culture, and not just about ticking the boxes.
That's so interesting and a really nice approach. Guada, what about you? How have you done this at your organization?
I guess for my company, or a payments company in general, which are standalone payments company or fintechs, I think the biggest challenge is having that kind of appreciation why compliance to AML CFT requirement is not just something that they need to embed in their companies because it's a regulatory requirement, right? So not everyone may understand the value of AML and counter financing of terrorism. Therefore, education, training, awareness campaign should be the top priority for these companies and for the compliance team or unit, because only then can they ensure that the company as a whole, from the board to management to the frontliners, understand the risk that the company is facing. We have found useful in our practice the inclusion of discussion of AML-CFT in our onboarding of new employees or new directors even. So it kind of provides the context, the needed context that they are operating in a company that places value on AML-CFT. So this is also, as I mentioned, supported by regular campaigns, because people tend to forget AML-CFT and targeted presentation whenever relevant. So that's how we think, as a start, we can actually build a culture of compliance to AML-CFT.
Right. Thank you. What about you, Jyothi? Do you think that compliance officers, do have that important seat at the table at the top? What is your view about the situation in India?
Yeah, sure. So India is still, uh, I would say, thanks to our regulators, first of all. So it has been a very, very a huge, but there's a major culture wave where they have shown us the importance of compliance in the past a few years. So we have, India has started into that where we are not as advanced as Singapore, like our other counterparts. But yes, the regulator has been very strict in the past couple of years, and they have come up with pretty good guidelines with respect to the payment aggregators, with respect to how the KYC and AML guidelines should be, and we are building up to be to comply with the standards at global standards. So uh, I, I remember there were way back, some 10 years back, it used to be only a small compliance department managing a set of things. But now we see the awareness of compliance even in the product team, the tech team, the engineering. Everyone is aware of it. They know this something like a min KYC wallet, what should be the limits, what should be a limit of a full KYC wallet. So that awareness is created well in the past couple of years. But yes, they are still training modules required. We are somewhere, I would say, we are not, we may not be somewhere at 100%, but yes, that awareness is pretty good in India. Once again, I'll say it's because of the regulator guidelines coming up. Most of our entities are pretty aware. They are having the training sessions, and they they should be very near to that 100% soon. Yeah.
Thank you. And let's jump now to that really important issue that so many of you have brought up on skill sets and how are payments companies managing the whole human resource and skill development side. But before that, again, I'm going to ask my colleague to bring up the second poll, and let's try to understand if our participants feel the same way about their organization's efforts at driving AML CFT talent development and skill enhancement. If let's try and understand that. Okay, so there's probably already a lot that's going on, and let me take a minute, to mention here that Fintelekt has a large range of training offerings that are specifically created for payment services companies. We already have an e-learning based AML CFT general awareness program that many payments companies are already using to train their entire workforce on AML CFT fundamentals. We can also train risk and compliance teams on specific issues like risks from cross-border payments or transaction monitoring. We train board of directors at a strategic level. And also, if you log into Fintelekt Academy for our video-based repository of payments and fintech courses, so when you log in to download your participation certificate, you can take a look at these resources. If you need more info, please do look up our website or email us. So I think we've already shared the results of this poll, and if I can ask Guada to comment, I think a lot of organizations are already doing a lot on training, but still there's 36%, let's say, more efforts are required. What is your view on this?
Yes, because in any case, AML CFT is a very fluid field, right? So the things that you learn, I guess, and the typologies that you face 5 years, 2 years ago is pretty different from what we're actually facing right now. Payments also is a very innovative industry. So there is really a need to level up in terms of training. So what you can do is, as mentioned by Arpita, Fintelekt offers a lot of training also, and I think there is a good trainings on payments. So it's part of your task also, I guess. Head of compliance is to mentor the next generation of compliance officers, right? And not just compliance officer, even other employees in a company. So you really need to educate and consistently campaign why you need to enhance or assess your AML CFT program regularly so that you know that your company is still insulated from any emerging threats or risks.
Thank you. Thank you. What about you, Jyothi? What do you feel about this?
So, the I agree with the audience audience poll. I definitely agree. There is a need of the requirement. There's still there's still a huge need of the training requirement. That's where Fintelekt also comes into the picture. Like I said, there's a huge awareness still to be created in the organizations, Arpita. So so something like there's a new regulation which is released by RBI today. I need to inform my entire team, the entire there's a product team, there's a tech team. Everyone has to be informed about it. So that's where my needs come into the picture. How do I do it? It's not just about sending a circular across. When they are building the future itself, they should be aware. If I put this particular future, would this violate the regulation or not? Where does this information go? Something like a payment aggregator. How does this information flow? Which information is flowing? What am I collecting? Where does it go? So every regulation which is passed out, let it be from FIU or let it be from RBI, there's a training requirement along with it which comes into the picture. And it's a very huge challenge for us. We are having trainings, but yes, they are not definitely enough. There's a huge gap which needs to be closed.
Right. Thank you. Before we turn to the audience questions, there's one issue that, for which we received multiple questions at the time of registration from participants, and that is around sanctions compliance and screening. So would it be possible for the speakers to touch on sanctions compliance or screening for instant payment systems? And one participant adds, the problem is that banks cannot do the sanction screening before conducting the transactions because of its instant and 24/7 nature. However, according to the recommendation 16 of the Financial Action Task Force, the banks have to do sanction screening for both domestic and overseas transactions. So could you share the experience on how to comply with recommendation 16 while not interrupting the instant transactions? So can I request Julia to probably shed some light on this?
Yeah, I think one of the things about the recommendation is that you need to have completed the originator and the beneficiary information. And so when we talk about, okay, when it comes to the instant, you have got to define what it means by instant. When the funds go out, there is still that filter. When it comes to the cross-border, it will still go through SWIFT. And when you go through SWIFT, there is already one round of screening there. So typically, you will probably see that in the traditional banking space, doing a cross-border transaction normally take a couple of days. It's not instant, like, within seconds. In the crypto world, yeah, it is likely to be within seconds, but there are also the travel rule that you need to comply with. That's on the crypto side. So generally, I would say in the case of crypto, it will always be post monitoring and doing things post the transaction. But in the banking world with SWIFT, we still have some time to be able to stop the transaction from going through. Domestic, that's a different risk. I would call it a risk-based approach. Yes, we do need to do the screening. Chances are it would be post as well. That's how I have experienced it so far.
Okay. What about you, Jyothi? How are you managing this challenge?
So we conduct the sanction screening at the time of onboarding itself, Arpita. So all the payment system operators, as per the AML KYC guidelines, we have to do the screening at the time of onboarding itself. So usually most of us go through a third-party software solution, like we take the list either from LexisNexis or WorldCheck, and we integrate it with our AML internal system. where at the time of onboarding, the merchant goes through a name screening. So actually, as a payment system operator, we don't have much of this kind of a challenge because without a name screening, I'm not going to let this merchant do the transactions itself. If the name screening fails, we are going to stop it there. If the name screening is clear, then I will let him move ahead with the further next steps of it. So this
Okay.
is a common practice with all most of the payment service providers in India.
Okay. Thank you. Guada, what about you? Any the experience that you would like to share?
I guess as far as sanction screening is concerned, it's one of those things. Again, quoting the same quote by Obi-Wan Kenobi. As far as sanction screening is concerned, there is do or do not. There is no try as far as sanction screening is concerned. You really have to do it, even as a payments company, right? So that's one of the tools that I actually insisted that we have as a payments company. The Philippines, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, I think, issued an FAQ on where the responsibility lies as far as sanction screening is concerned for payment transaction. So you still do sanction screening depending if your customer or end customer is the sender or the receiver, but there's some sort of third party reliance also, which I think is consistent with FATF regulation. So it's being done. Rest assured that if a person, there is a sanction hit, and I know that there are some participants from the AMLC, Anti-Money Laundering Council in the Philippines. So I have to be careful when I say these things. So if there is a target match or a potential target match, rest assured that we're doing what's required of us as a covered person.
Okay. But I think it has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. All of you have really touched upon, so many different practical issues and thrown light on so many different aspects of AML and digital payments. Really grateful to each one of you, Julia, Jyothi, Vijay, and Guada, for your time and for sharing all your knowledge with the participants. Our immense gratitude also to the Asian Bankers Association for this invaluable partnership that we have with them and for all the support that they provide us. Many thanks also to all the participants attending today and being such a lively audience. As always, you will all receive instructions to download the participation certificate, as I mentioned, on Monday. We're also running a small survey on payments. So if you represent a payments company, it would be great to have your inputs. This survey will be available when you exit the webinar. It will be there in your browser. So with that, again, thank you so much. And this is Arpita signing off on behalf of the Fintelekt team. Have a great Friday and have a great weekend ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having
Thank you
us.
so much.
Thank
Thank you.
you, everybody.
everyone.
Okay, have a great weekend. Bye.